Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Also, make sure you're subscribed to Off the Floor. Link right here in the description for the most information and conversation on the Miami Heat. $2.99 per month. You can bypass the $1 Apple upcharge if you use the link that's right here. Once you join, you're not going anywhere. Check it out. It's Off the Floor. Also, check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Includes Prize Picks. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E, our daily fantasy partner. Use that code FIVE and you get $50 to play right away. Prize Picks, the place to play daily fantasy. You can play across the sports spectrum, and we're running a contest. If you're subscribed to Prize Picks using the code 5 and to Big Picks Energy using the code 5, whoever has the best card on Sunday, in other words, wins the most, we're going to give you an additional $59 in promo funds. So check it out. It's prizepicks.com. And now, because we don't have the full song yet, our guy Mercy is working on it. We're going to give you a very generic open to 5 on the Floor. What do you think? Can I wait? Hold on a second. I got to get off of this Eternal. We got to go to Eternal here. Our today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Scolding, and follow me at Ethan J. Scolding at the 5 Reasons Sports. Got Eternal Bass. You can follow him at Eternal Bass. Of course, our host on playback, also our moderator on our Off the Floor Discord. Although he has wisely given himself a month off. We'll explain why in a second. I haven't left my own devices this weekend. First thing, I have no car. It was stolen. So
that ain't funny.
It's really not. So I have nowhere to go. I'm just stuck here. And so I'm just recording podcasts, and try to give Alex a day off, which means I've got to produce this stuff, and this is what you get. I think Jimmy took my car. Well, Jimmy doesn't need my car, but I think Jimmy took my car to San Francisco. We are going to talk about Jimmy Butler here. We're going to squeeze in a quick episode. That will not be the new intro, by the way, and it's not Mercy's fault. I want to be clear on that. He did something, but we wanted him to do something else. So not that his first one wasn't good, but we wanted him to add something. So we're just waiting on that to come in. All right, Eternal, let's talk about it. Jimmy Butler is supposed to play for the Warriors tonight. Do we have an update on that as we speak? Because I know there were some issues with the physicals. Have we seen anything?
I haven't seen anything that would give us, a clear update of whether or not he's good to go or not. One thing we did see, for those that's listening to us, is that he wasn't able to, I think, do shoot around.
Yes.
Earlier.
Well, that's not new.
Yeah.
There were a lot of shoot arounds he didn't do with Miami. I mean, at least in this case, I hope it wasn't that Steve Kerr announced.
You said we weren't talking about the past.
I hope Kerr didn't say we're going to go with the same starting lineup as last game, like Spoelstra did, and then everybody else has to look around to see if Jimmy left. But we're assuming he's going to play tonight. And yes, we're going to do the retrospective. We're going to give him his proper due in a full episode when we have more time to do it. Also, just so you know, we will have coverage of the new players who are coming in the Heat. We're not turning this into a Jimmy Butler podcast going forward. We are going to have coverage of Wiggins and Kyle Anderson, and also of
Jesus Christ, Ethan.
It's been that kind of weekend of Morris. Thank you, Devian Morris. We're going to have full coverage of all of that.
David Mitchell.
I'm sorry, Morris Mitchell. Like I said, it's been that kind of weekend. We're going to have full coverage of all of that as they are introduced. They're introduced Sunday, 9:00. We hear Pat Riley's not taking questions. Our guy Brady Hawk is going to be on the scene. I don't wake up quite that early, and again, I don't have a car, so I won't be down there, but Brady does, and he's going to be making it there. So we'll have full coverage of the new guys. But we do want to talk about Jimmy a little bit because we really didn't get into this that much the other night after the trade. And I'm just curious, without getting to the nuts and bolts of it, do you think that Jimmy Butler is a good fit for the current Golden State Warriors? I'm not talking about off the court stuff. I'm talking about on the court.
I think if they had made another move, probably. I was expecting another move, and what we heard from Sean and Chris Haynes and others is that they tried to get the Vooch deal done, but were unable to get it done. I guess Chicago was asking for too much for Nikola Vucevic, so it didn't go through, and so now you're left with just Jimmy. I don't think Golden State got anything else besides Jimmy in the deal. right? So you just got Jimmy. So you sent out Kyle Anderson. You sent out
Andrew Wiggins. Now
Andrew
I need to
Wiggins.
help you. There you go.
Well, I had already had Andrew. I was just trying to think, was there anybody else besides those two that went out?
No, I think those are the two players that went out. Like you mentioned, Kerr had been interested in bringing Vucevic in. I know that. It also seemed at the press conferences, and this is something that we kind of signaled to everyone, but then I think they saw it for themselves, that Steph Curry and Steve Kerr don't seem to be 1,000% on board with this. Did you gather that? I want to get back to your view of how he fits on the court, but I mean, Steve said he never talked to him, right?
Yeah, it didn't seem, like it was the most supportive group of the move. But I mean, like you said, and like some rumblings I had heard behind the scenes, does it seem like it was a ownership kind of thing that happened? But
it was ownership and Joe Lacob, primarily from what I heard, but Mike Dunleavy Jr., who was the new GM, who replaced Bob Myers a little over a year ago, he was the guy kind of driving it in the negotiations. That's who the Heat were communicating with. We know, obviously, that Golden State wanted Kevin Durant. There's no secret to that. The Heat had gotten inklings that Durant really didn't want to go there. Then after that, the Warriors got inklings of that as well, and it became very clear. And so then they pivoted to Jimmy. But I find it interesting that, Jimmy's talked a lot in his opening press conference about wanting to be wanted when he was not the first choice of the Golden State Warriors. Kevin Durant was. But ultimately, and the Heat were having those conversations with the Warriors. And as they were having the conversation with the Warriors, they got the inkling that the Warriors were going to send Butler to Durant because that was their primary target. So the Heat had their own conversations with the Suns. Suns asked for everything. Specifically, their owner asked for everything, like every young player and asset, like Ware, Jovic, Jaquez, picks, all of it. Not like one or two, like everything. And so I know the reports have been, well, the Heat just offered Josh Richardson and Jimmy Butler, when the reality was, again, there could have been some kind of a middle ground, but when two sides are that far apart, one side wants everything and the other, kind of is not inclined to do that, it didn't really go much further. So Jimmy, of course, ends up with the Golden State Warriors, which we said at could be a possibility, but I don't get the sense that this was necessarily Steve Kerr's plan or the plan of their best player, Steph Curry. After all, they let Klay Thompson go, who Steph misses on a daily basis and still talks about, because they were trying to pivot in a different direction. And now they've gotten older again. Although I would argue, and most would argue, that Jimmy is a more effective player than Klay Thompson at this stage of their various careers. So is your concern about the on-court fit spacing? Because I never thought I would say that about the Golden State Warriors and a team with Steph, right? But that, as I look at the lineup they're going to put together, if you're playing Kuminga, and you're playing Kevon Looney, and you're playing Draymond, and I mean, they really only have two shooters on the roster. Now, Wiggins was a very good 3-point shooter for them. He shot 38% this year, pretty decent volume. There are only two real shooters are Curry and Hield, right? Like and both are elite, but it seems to me like they're missing spacing on the rest of the roster.
They still have Paz, right? And Moses.
What is he shooting from three? Let's see, because I don't think he's had a particularly solid season in that regard. I just wonder overall, as I look at their group, they have always relied on spacing. That's been their big thing. We know obviously the offense that Kerr comes in. It's a lot of read and react. It's getting to 3-point shooting. That is how they've had success traditionally. I'm looking at Pods' numbers right now. He's shooting 42.7% overall. He's shooting from three this year, 32%. Now, a little bit better over the last 10.
Moody is shooting 33.
40%, right. So two guys in the low 30s, even though it looks like Pods' numbers have come up a little bit there of late. So that would be one of my questions, is spacing. We know that Jimmy's, at times hit the three, but it's not been a consistent part of his game. Kerr said something that I found interesting, which is he said that Jimmy was basically going to be featured in the non-Steph minutes. So as I present that to you, what is in the non-Steph minutes? Yes, I can see them running through him like the way the Heat ran through him. You play Jimmy with some subs, maybe, and you give Steph a break. And maybe if that's been an issue for Golden State, not having anybody to run those units, that Jimmy can run those units, and you play a little bit slower. He isolates mismatches. I can see how that can work. How do you think the dynamic between Jimmy and Steph works when they're playing together, though? Because that's ultimately what they're going to have to close with.
I mean, well, we know Jimmy is a great screener. He's a great short roll person. Jimmy may not be the type of playmaker that LeBron is, but Jimmy is very low turnover, knows how to make the right play as far as, the passes and reads and stuff. And I think there are ways to use Jimmy and Steph together. I would be excited about seeing it if they had something else to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you got half of the ingredients. And I'm one of the few that believe that Jimmy should have gotten that extension, like we talked about, the 2 year, because I do think Jimmy at least has 2 more years of high level play. I don't think we saw it this year just because of the off the court stuff. But I mean, you saw the 35, 39, 19 and 10 performance in Detroit. I do believe Jimmy can still give you some of that, and I think that will be a lot more reserved in Golden State just because he doesn't have to carry the load offensively. I do think he'll be able to help with some scoring, and probably because of the attention that Steph draws. I mean, you think about Duncan Robinson and the attention that he drew on offense for the Heat, maximize that by like times 3 or 4 for Steph. So I think Jimmy is going to get a lot of attention, especially in those pick and roll situations, especially cutting. If you look at Golden State's offense, it's not as fast moving side to side, east to west, north to south kind of thing as it was in years past. But I do think there are going to be opportunities for Jimmy in the dunker spot, especially having somebody like Steph and like Draymond who can be able to, manipulate the defense in ways of playmaking. And I think Jimmy will benefit off of that. When it comes to him running the second unit, I do think you'll probably see him more on ball like we were seeing the last couple of years in Miami, as far as him just being like a playmaker and then just setting other guys up. I mean, there's a game where he made Cody Zeller look like so.
Jimmy's great. Jimmy's great with backup centers. Like he really is. Like he has maximized those guys until they all fell on their face on their own. But he's absolutely great with backup centers. That's one of the shames here, because now you have a guy in Ware, who I know obviously you're a fan of, who actually provides that real vertical spacing, and you don't have Jimmy around with him. They ended up playing together what, 2 games, 2-3 games?
2 or 3 games.
Yeah, 2 or 3 games. That was about it. All right, on the other side of this, I want to get to the Draymond element because that's fascinating to me. And also, I want to get to the standings because I just did a podcast. I don't know if it'll go. I could probably go after this one, post after this one, but with Adele and with Matt about the 2025 draft, because the real prize for the Heat in this trade, and I like Andrew Wiggins, okay, and I think he's going to help a lot. I think he might lead this team in minutes down the stretch, honestly, and I think he's a player they're going to want to keep. But the real prize was the 2025 pick, and the Heat may get it this year because we're going to take a look at the standings, and I'm not totally convinced that Golden State's going to make the playoffs based on the way the standings look right now. So we'll get into that in a second. Before we do, I want to tell you about a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friend Eric Rubenstein. You can find him at 877-829-ERIC. That's 877-829-ERIC or 877-829-3742 or ericrubenstein.com. If you have a car accident, this is the guy to contact here in South Florida. He services the entire Tri-County area. Went to St. Thomas University, graduated magna cum laude, grew up in Lauderhill, huge Miami Heat fan. He seems to know everybody in town, actually. Follow his Instagram account, Attorney Rubenstein. You will not be disappointed, but he brings that kind of personality and knowledge to the courtroom as well. So check him out, ericrubenstein.com. Again, it's 877-829-3742. Let's get to the Draymond part before we get to the standings. The Heat, I can tell you, and the people I've talked to with the Heat about this, they believe Draymond's going to try to hold Jimmy accountable in a way that nobody really could with Miami at a certain point. But Draymond has to be held accountable himself sometimes. So how is this going to work? I can see them like really Draymond's not the player he was defensively 3-4 years ago, but he's still pretty good. I can see if Jimmy and he are engaged defensively, that in terms of their switching, their ability to match up off the ball, on the ball, but then also make plays off the ball. I think it could be fairly dynamic. We know obviously Steph has never been an elite defender, and he hasn't gotten necessarily better as he's aged. So I can see a defensive fit there. The offensive fit to me is clunky. Draymond's always been an erratic three-point shooter when he's actually gone to that. He's not an elite. He's an elite passer, absolutely an elite passer, but is not really elite in other ways offensively. I guess on court and off court, how do you see the Draymond Jimmy dynamic working?
It has one or two ways of going. They're either going to be super fucking close, excuse my language, or that is going to go down very quickly. I think they are both high-level competitors. Jimmy is a troll. Draymond is a troll in his own way. So I do think when it comes to like on-court competition, and Steph is a troll, and I think that it has the opportunity to really push them forward. By forward, I mean second round at best. I don't really see them going far again because they didn't do any additional moves besides Jimmy. But I do think, like you said, when they lock in, they can probably do some things for a couple of games, but ultimately lose out. But you're talking about two high-level IQ basketball players.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you just hope that part of them connects, and they, them connecting, that chemistry kind of takes shape and spreads to the other guys on the team as well. So we know Jimmy is a very fiery competitor. He makes you feel like you can win any game he steps on the court. He makes you feel like you're 10,000 times better than what you are. If he is that type of person at that time, as we saw, that didn't go that way this year. But it just, I don't know, man. As far as the accountability thing, it can be an infinite loop with them, right? Where they both hold each other accountable. But if that,
it could also go spectacularly poorly. It feels to me like the winning has to come first. In this case, we talk about whether winning builds chemistry or vice versa, or else I do think it's going to go poorly. The Warriors culture is very different from the Heat culture, okay, in a variety of ways. And I did spend some time around the Warriors, not obviously like the Heat, but I did because I was covering a lot of Cavs games when they played I covered that finals against Golden State and just spent some time around the Warriors during their run a little bit. And there's a few differences with the Heat. It tends to be characterized as a more casual atmosphere. And Iguodala spoke to this, by the way, who still has a great relationship with the Heat. And they still communicate with Andre pretty regularly. And Andre spoke to the differences of this when he was on the OG's podcast. Whereas, like, again, Kerr is going to kind of let you figure things out. With the Heat, there's none of that. Like, it is, I mean, Spo and Kerr may have coached together on the Olympic team, but they handle things in very different ways. And the structure of the organization above them is different also. And it was different with Golden State when Bob Myers was running it, and now Dunleavy took over from Bob Myers, who was his assistant GM, is that it is more casual in Golden State, but there is an expectation level. It's not casual in the way that some organizations in the NBA are, where like they don't care, where there's no standards. Okay. And there are a lot of those. They have standards. They're just, the practices don't tend to be as grueling as Heat practices. One of the things you have to do in Golden State that kind of the Heat got away from a little bit with Jimmy is you have to talk to the media. Like that, I know, like Raymond Ritter, who's there, and I've obviously great respect for Tim Donovan, who's been the Heat's vice president of media relations since Pat Riley came down. And Tim and Ray Ritter are two of the media. They're like two of the. Tim's gonna hate me saying this, but like they're two of like the old guard now. Established with their teams for a very long time. Raymond came from the Lakers, but they expect you to talk there. Like Steph has set that standard, like Dwayne did with Miami. Okay, like Steph, that's the standard. They let that go with Jimmy in Miami. It's one of the reasons I think, and I know nobody cares about this. It's one of the reasons I think Jimmy didn't have a lot of media advocates on the way out the door, was because he didn't really engage with the media. Like, I don't think he did a single one-on-one with a single beat writer, of which I'm not anymore, but with a single beat writer in the entire time that he was in Miami. He did it with national guys and all that. He did not engage the way LeBron did, the way Dwayne did, the way Zoe, even once Zoe got out of the Zoe Day thing, the way Timmy did, the way Goran did, the way Shaq did. He just, Bosh, okay, any of them. But in Golden State, with the Warriors, he's gonna be expected to regularly, and I'm curious to see how that goes because it's something that he doesn't like doing. So that's one thing to watch out there. But I do think that the standard there is like Steph handles things a certain way, and Draymond gets away with what he can get away with. And that's where I think it's going to be fascinating to see whether Jimmy follows the Dre way or follows the Steph way. And I tend to think he's going to follow the Dre way, but I think that they're going to clash at times. Let me go to the other. Go ahead.
Do you think, I was just thinking about this while you was talking, does Jimmy show up on the Draymond podcast?
I was thinking the same thing. He might.
He's such a wild card that is really like,
yeah,
it's hard to say, especially at this point in his career. It's hard to say, man. I think that man is more liable to go on Draymond's podcast than he is to do any kind of like one-on-ones or anything like that. But maybe this newfound joy that he has in that $121 million extension,
right?
Maybe he just started doing media relations out of nowhere. Who knows?
Well, maybe also if he's opening some coffee shops in downtown San Francisco. Let me get to the standings here for a second before we close this thing up. As we speak, and there's some games going on right now. I don't think the Mavericks game is counted, but they got a huge lead against Houston and Anthony Davis's debut there. As we speak right now, there's one team that separated itself in the West, which is the Thunder. They're 6.5 games up. They just got Chet Holmgren back. I think you can lock them in for the 1 seed. Then you've got the Grizzlies, the Nuggets, and the Rockets. And I don't know that most people in the West or in the league necessarily take the Rockets and Grizzlies completely seriously yet, particularly the Rockets. The Nuggets at 3, but they didn't add anything at the deadline. I do think people take them seriously because of Jokic and obviously winning a recent championship. But then you get to this mix here. The Lakers, the Wolves have kind of righted themselves. The Clippers are at 7. Okay, so you have the Lakers at 5, just made the huge trade for Doncic, but he's not going to play in this next game, nor is LeBron. Then the Wolves at 29 and 23, the Clippers at 28 and 23, the Mavs but then you get into this mix of teams that all made major changes between 8 and 11. The Mavericks at 20, well, one didn't make a major change, but it blew up its locker room. Mavericks at 27 and 25, who just went from Luka, who wasn't playing a lot, to AD, who is playing for now, but may not play a lot based on his history. The Suns, who just created enormous toxicity in their locker room and now have KD wanting to leave when he never wanted to before, at 26 and 25 coming in today. The Kings, which went on a run after firing Mike Brown, but then traded Fox, and now they have Levine. And the Warriors at 25 and 26 in the 11 spot. If you were to handicap it right now with Jimmy Butler, where do the Warriors finish in the West?
I think the best that they can finish probably is 6. I think the worst that they can finish is probably 11.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Well, the Spurs are not that far behind either. The Spurs are 22 and 27, and they just added De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah, I think the Spurs probably do get up into like the 5 and 6 range.
I mean, the Warriors. So the Warriors right now, as we stand, again, this is going to be, and they're 3 games behind the Wolves for 6, 2.5 behind the Clippers for 7. They are behind the Mavericks 1.5, Suns 1, basically virtual tie with the Kings, and 2 ahead of the Spurs. I mean, it feels to me like their bet is getting the play in and have Jimmy get them out of there, right? They're not going to finish as high as 6 in the West.
I mean, you got it really just. Well, I have an update for you. Jimmy is active for the game, and also AD got hurt. So AD came out, balling.
Mm-hmm.
And then
He hit his prize pick and then went out.
and then Houston sized up and kind of bothered him a little bit, but he did have a non-contact injury and went out late in the third quarter. I think that's also another issue for the Warriors is teams can size up in a way they can't.
Right.
And this ain't younger Jimmy or younger Steph or younger Draymond. So you can't outpace other teams. So it's like, how do you get it in the mud? Do you have the shooting to do that? Like I think you do have two very clutch players in, Steph and Jimmy, but are you gonna do that with two 34-plus-year-old players?
Well, I thought that's what you were going to say. I'm with you about the sizing up, but when you started talking about the injury stuff, I just wonder, you've got three guys who are 35 or older, and aren't they going to miss time down the stretch of this? Like you're in a situation in that West where with roughly 30 games left to get into the play-in, because again, right now the Warriors are not even in it. To get into the play-in, but potentially get out of the play-in, whether you get to a 6 seed or to have to fight your way out of actual play-in games, their guys are going to need to be healthy. Now, the one thing I'll say is Jimmy has not played a lot. That could benefit them. Like he's missed a lot of time. He's basically been on vacation for 6 weeks. I mean, right? I mean, he's been playing dominoes and.
I mean, you could say that for December too. I mean, he had that. He had
right.
the 2 weeks that he missed while we. That's a different story. But he's been out basically, I guess you can say, since early December. When he came back, it's not like he played, a lot of minutes or played super hard. He should be well rested. So I mean, I guess that's if we're looking at objectively what could possibly happen for them is that Jimmy played the rest of the stretch and he carries them actually. Like he gives Steph a break. He gives Steph a break and allowed Steph to recharge.
Mm-hmm. Here's my prediction. So we'll close with this. I'm going to say they end up in the 9 spot. I'm going to say they end up in the 9 spot. And you know the way that the play-in works. You're looking at a 9-10, right? And then the 7-8 with the 7-8 winner, advances, into the playoffs. And then the 7-8 loser has to play whoever wins the 9-10 game. I'm going to say they get to 9. I have a hard time seeing them get a whole lot higher. I know everybody's been waiting for the bottom to fall out with the Clippers, but Ty Lue has done a really good job with them, and they seem to understand their roles. I feel like, again, as long as Kawhi stays on the court, I feel like that they stay somewhere in that 7-8 range. And I think the Mavericks, I understand why people are furious about the trade. I get it. Now you're saying AD's hurt already. But I do think that if AD could stay healthy, you look at their size.
Oh, they're big as hell.
They're big, and they're going to defend, and Kid's going to get them to defend. And I think it's going to be hard for the Warriors, like you said, to kind of match up with them. The Suns, to me, are the weird one. I can see the Kings falling behind the Warriors. I can see the Spurs not being ready to overtake the Warriors now that the Warriors have Jimmy. The Suns are the weird one to me because I just don't know how dysfunctional things are right now. It seems to be like very, but KD again can overcome a lot of that stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm gonna say the 9 seed, and I am gonna say that Jimmy and Steph get them to a playoff series. I can see them coming out of the 9-10, beating the 7-8 loser, getting to an 8 seed, and then they're lining up with OKC. And that's what it feels like, Eternal, is it feels like these teams in the West don't really think OKC, Houston, and Memphis in particular. The Nuggets are top 4 team too, but they don't really seem to think those 3 teams are experienced enough. And so all of these teams that you're looking at that are competing for these spots from 5 down, whether it's the Lakers, whether it's the Wolves with Ant, whether it's the Clippers potentially, with Kawhi and Harden, whether it's the Mavericks with AD and Kyrie, whether it's the Suns with Durant and Booker, whether it's the Warriors with Curry and Butler, all of these teams have 2 guys who have done a lot of stuff in the playoffs.
Right.
And it feels like the bottom teams in the West, the bottom playoff teams in the West, the play-in teams, think that they can basically upset these teams that are maybe more talented, more athletic, but more inexperienced. And I that's where this feels like it's going. And it feels like that's the bet that Golden State's making, is that if you got into an 8-1 series with OKC and you got playoff Jimmy, and it just feels to be a little bit like, well, the Heat, well, if you got playoff, you got the 8 seed, the 7 seed, but you got playoff Jimmy. It's still a bet on playoff Jimmy, but OKC is, I just have a hard time seeing how Warriors would compete with OKC's youth, athleticism, and all the kind of stuff that they offer.
And size.
And size.
I think the thing, one, I'm not saying it's biasly. I wouldn't bet against Memphis if you got them in the first round. Obviously that depends on health. Memphis does have some playoff track record that may have not gone far, but the teams that they have played when healthy, they played them well. They're just not being healthy. I think OKC, I think that is a legitimate like cause for concern as far as how will they handle the playoff pressure, how will they do. You saw what happened last year. You know, I do think them having a little bit more size, getting Hardenstein, getting Chet back. Chet has an opportunity to kind of get himself going the rest of the way. I think honestly, Ethan, I think the Lakers, the Suns, and the Warriors are the three teams that really gonna be jockeying for those like 7 and 8. I can see the Suns and Lakers taking like, right? You know, the Lakers are missing AD. That changes your defense completely. The Suns now have a very toxic locker room, and before that, you were 500,
right,
or under 500. So now you have a toxic locker room, and you're 500. So like that doesn't bode well for the long stretch that you have to take, especially when you have to make up so much ground on the rest of the teams in the West. It's a very, very competitive conference. With the Warriors, excuse me. Yeah, you got Jimmy, who has, you know, have a lot of arrested time, but you didn't do anything else to like really bolster the roster, and you just got Jimmy.
For Wiggins, who was having a very good year. Like it's not like you just added Jimmy. You added Jimmy and replaced a guy who was a 38% 3-point shooter and a very good defender. I'm not going to argue that he's at Jimmy's level when the stakes are highest, although he was the second best player on a champion and was actually their best player, two-way player in that series.
And that's the thing too. That's the thing too that they're going to be asking Jimmy to do now is just like, you're going to have to be our best perimeter defender, or is there going to be Kuminga? Because a lot of this is not just them banking on Jimmy. This is them banking on Kuminga stepping up. This is them banking on Jackson Davis stepping up. Like they, especially since you weren't able to get that Vooch deal done, which probably could have carried you a little bit more from a scoring and rebounding kind of thing, and just, you know, giving teams a different look and being able to size up. But they're gonna really lean into Jimmy and Draymond being really good to great defenders at their age, and especially going into the playoffs. I just don't see a viable path for them. Like, they're gonna fight like hell just to get into the playoffs, and then they're gonna fight like hell just to get out of their first round. Like,
Jimmy's path was easier in the East just because of the lack of quality in the East, sort of in the middle of the conference, where the Heat, no matter what the Heat seem to do or how much they decide to play Terry Rozier in the fourth quarter, they can't seem to slip below 7 or 8. Anyway, we got to run because we want to get this up before the game is actually played. Appreciate it. Eternal, you can follow him at Eternal Bass, and also on Playback and on Off the Floor, which we recommend that you subscribe to. And I'll just give a yes or a no here on this. I'm going to give you an over-under play. Jimmy Butler averages 18 and a half points per game the rest of the season.
Yes.
Okay. I think so too, but I don't think it'll be by much. I still think this is going to be a Curry-centric offense. They're going to lean on Jimmy mostly in the moment at the end of games, along with Steph, and in the moments that Steph is on the sideline. All right, we appreciate it. Check out the other episodes. Again, we're going to have a draft episode up here shortly, and we will be introducing all of the new players, or at least talking about their fits after they're introduced by the Heat at 9 o'clock on Sunday.